All right, so good afternoon, good evening, good day, depending on when you're watching this. It's Josh Franco, your professor of political science at Kuyamaka. Welcome to our workshop on global conflict and cooperation. Thanks for taking the time to join in. I appreciate it. Um, this workshop is about defining, exploring, and discussing global conflict and cooperation from the point of view of different institutions, country governments, and non-governmental organizations. Our schedule for the fall, we started back in August. And last week, in week 11, we discussed Sudan. This week, we'll be discussing Ecuador and the Galapagos Islands, which I'm always fascinated with. So we'll talk about that today. And if you're interested, the recordings from the summer are also available on the ipolicy.com website. All right, so let's go ahead and jump to our workshop for this week, week 12, Ecuador. Here you can see a map of where the country of Ecuador is located. It's in South America, on the continent of South America. It's a sea-faring country located at the north tip of the Andes mountain range, south of Colombia and northwest of Peru. And note here that this little collection of islands, the Galapagos, are part of Ecuador as well. So our learning objectives with this workshop are the following. First is to identify where the country of Ecuador is located. Secondly is to describe the recent marine conservations of Ecuador, and then to describe the internal conflict between the government and drug trafficking. Okay, so here's a map, or a political map of the country of Ecuador. Here it's obviously bordered by the Pacific Ocean. The capital is Quito, and then the various cities within that region. And note that you'll see the Andes Mountains kind of range finishing up through this part. One of the major rivers in the country of Ecuador is the Rio Napo, and also the Rio Putumayo in the eastern part of the country. Let me go ahead and open up the CIA World Factbook to kind of give us some background on this, and I'll have it read to us this short background on the country so we just kind of get a general sense of what's going on. So let me have that play for us.
What is now Ecuador formed part of the Northern Inca Empire until the Spanish conquest in 1533. Quito became a seat of Spanish colonial government in 1563 and part of the Viceroyalty of New Granada in 1717. The territories of the Viceroyalty New Granada, Colombia, Venezuela, and Quito gained their independence between 1819 and 1822 and formed a federation known as Gran Colombia. When Quito withdrew in 1830, the traditional name was changed in favor of the Republic of the Equator. Between 1904 and 1942, Ecuador lost territories in a series of conflicts with its neighbors. A border war with Peru that flared in 1995 was resolved in 1999. Although Ecuador marked 30 years of civilian governance in 2004, the period was marred by political instability. Protests in Quito contributed to the midterm ouster of 3 of Ecuador's last 4 democratically elected presidents. In late 2008, voters approved a new constitution, Ecuador's 20th since gaining independence. General elections were held in April 2021, and voters elected Guillermo Lasso president. He will take office on May 24, 2021.
So there you get a sense of just a bit of the background of the country of Ecuador, noting that it was originally a part of the Incan Empire. And so I think it's important just to note that this is a colony, or a Spanish colonized this part of the world. And obviously it adversely affected the indigenous community of the Inca. Note here that it also had a connection with Colombia as a part of this federation, or of this grouping of countries. But then that basically changed when the people of Ecuador, the growing sense of the people of Ecuador withdrew. And that's also parts of the seeds of conflict that we are going to learn more about in a few moments. And then lastly, pointing out that it has, been more or less, a constitutionally based government, but there's been instability for a variety of reasons. And then there's just newly elected leadership this past year. So I don't know the terms of office or kind of the more specifics of the government or the political history, but I think it just gives you a sense that, like any country, there's a deep history, and those histories plant seeds that then grow into other things going forward. So with that said, we'll go ahead and take a look at conflict in this region or in this country. And I found this article in the New York Times titled "Ecuador's President Declares State of Emergency to Battle Crime." So let me go ahead and open up that article, and let's have this read to us for a little bit. So let me put this in reader mode since it takes away some of the advertisements. And we'll go ahead and have this start.
Guillermo Lasso said the military.
And we're going to change the voice option just to move it over a little bit. Okay.
Military and the police would patrol the streets to provide security to confront drug trafficking and other crimes. Credit, Marcos Pin/EPA, via Shutter. Quito, Ecuador President Guillermo Lasso has declared a state of emergency to confront drug trafficking and other crimes in Ecuador, saying the military and police would take to the streets to provide security. In a national broadcast on Monday night, Mr. Lasso said, "There is only one enemy, drug trafficking." He pointed out that Ecuador had gone from being a trafficking zone to a country that also consumed drugs. This is not only reflected in the amount of drugs consumed in our country, but in the number of crimes that today have a direct or indirect relationship with the sale of narcotics, he said. Red Circle date at last. Veronica Rivadeneira. The state of emergency gives the authorities the power to restrict freedom of movement, assembly and association. Mr. Lasso said drug trafficking had fueled an increase in homicides, burglaries, thefts of vehicles and goods, and robberies of people. This year, there have been violent revolts in the country's prisons because of drug violence, especially in Guayaquil. The clashes have ended in bloody massacres by inmates of rival mafia gangs linked to Mexican drug cartels. About 230 people have been killed in the prison compounds. Over the weekend, a 13-year-old boy having ice cream with his family in Guayaquil was killed after he was caught in the crossfire between gunmen and a police officer. The province of Guayas has seen a 70% increase in homicides, with 641 so far this year. The president announced the creation of a legal defense unit to defend uniformed officers who, he said, had been sued for fulfilling their duty. Mr. Lasso said judges should guarantee peace and order, not impunity and crime. Editors pick. This part is the word. Are you missing? After 14 years, continue read. The national government will deploy all law enforcement to carry out a single mission, to restore security to citizens, he added. We will take the battle to the underworld wherever it hides.
So there you get just a brief sense of the challenges that the new president Lasso is facing, and his willingness to mobilize the country's government, military, and law enforcement arms in what he perceives and believes to be a significant problem for the country. Knowing just a little bit about this part of the world and some of these connections, part of the challenge is always that when you have things happen in neighboring states or neighboring countries, that it could have a spillover effect. So we know that in having a workshop about Colombia a few weeks ago, that it has its own rich history, its own interactions, its own standing, its own challenges. And part of the challenges they faced is obviously a long time civil war between different elements, and at the same time, the presence of narcotics and the trafficking and the consumption of it, and then the obviously implications that come with having a non-legalized good or service being provided, and basically it attracting criminality and the like. And so knowing that it's happening in one country, it sounded like the country of Ecuador wasn't really dealing with that. It was like maybe a pass-through part where people would walk through with narcotics or other things through the country and then make their way, assumingly either in other parts of Central or Northern America. And now it's kind of starting to directly affect the population. So this is where an example of conflict. It's an example of an internal conflict, but I point out that part of the why it's become an internal conflict is that the nature of the spillover from one country, in this case, Colombia, has an effect on it as well. So political borders are just that, right? They're political borders, but that doesn't mean things like human movement, right? Migration, immigration, the outward migration, the economics, the trade, and both the good stuff and the bad stuff that come with it. So this conflict is partly the result of spillover from enduring conflicts in neighboring countries. Now, with cooperation, I'd like to bring our attention to the Galapagos Marine Reserve and this recent announcement by the country of Ecuador and the government of Ecuador to create this significant expansion of a marine reserve. So let's go ahead and open up that article, and I'll put this also in reader mode, and we can change the reading voice.
Galapagos Marine.
I'm always changing the voice to let's see if I can get a little different one. We'll try. There's all these different ones. Let's try this one.
Marine Reserve, Conservationists Hail Expansion. By Vanessa Bush-Schluter, BBC News, Glasgow. Published 1 day ago. Image source. Image caption. The waters. Conservationists have welcomed the announcement by Ecuador that it will expand the marine reserve around the Galapagos Islands by 60,000 square kilometers. President Guillermo Lasso announced the move at the COP26 climate summit in Glasgow. Mr. Lasso told the BBC that his government wanted to show that action rather than words was the most effective way to fight climate change. Conservationists called it a brilliant first step. The existing marine protection area around the Galapagos measures 133,000 square kilometers and was one of the first large-scale marine conservation areas to be created. It is one of the most productive marine ecosystems in the world. Conservationists hope that its expansion will protect the migration routes of endangered species such as the whale shark and make the reserve more resilient to climate change. Ties that bind. Among those praising the move is Sarah Darwin, the great-great-granddaughter of biologist Charles Darwin, whose theory of evolution was inspired by the biodiversity he found on the Galapagos. Sarah, a botanist and an ambassador for the Galapagos Conservation Trust, told the BBC that she was very, very excited that President Lasso is taking the Galapagos so seriously. Image source, Hans Fell. Image cap. Botanist said, "We're really looking forward to taking further conservation measures forward with him both in the marine reserve and the islands themselves," she said. "This is a real commitment, I think." But the CEO of the Galapagos Conservation Trust, Sharon Johnson, said it was important that the resources be put in place to adequately protect the newly enlarged reserve. In 2020, a huge number of Chinese fishing boats were spotted in waters off the Galapagos, with conservationists accusing the fleet of pillaging the area for squid. President Lasso denied that the expansion of the marine reserve was a response to the Chinese fleet's movements, insisting it was an autonomous decision of the Ecuadorian government. Mr. Lasso said that in his most recent conversation with the Chinese president he sensed a clear commitment to respect Ecuador's maritime zone and that he therefore hoped there would be no repeat of the scenes which had played out in 2020. He added that his government would swap debt for conservation to create a fund that would allow Ecuador to beef up Navy patrols to protect the area and to provide artisanal fishermen working outside the marine reserve with support. The Galapagos and the seas surrounding them are a unique ecosystem home to whales, turtles and tuna, explained Professor Sandy Tutup and Dr. Meriwether Wilson from the University of Edinburgh. The fact that they are so rich in commercially important species is also what makes them so attractive to fishermen, say the two scientists, who were part of the team whose research underpinned the decision to expand the reserve. But Professor Tutup is confident that the expansion will benefit fishermen, too. Marine protection is often identified as a way to support fisheries, he says. If you manage to get the areas of protection correct, then they act as nursery grounds and then you get a spill out from these areas that support the surrounding fisheries. He says he hopes the benefits of protecting such a big area of ocean will become clear and that those who may have been skeptical of the move will see that it has not crippled the Ecuadorian fishing fleet. For Sarah Darwin, it's simple: if you can save the Galapagos, you can save the world.
So I think that article gives a really healthy explanation of the Galapagos Islands and the country of Ecuador's action in conserving the waters around it. Now, this is an example of cooperation because, as you are aware, the almost every country of the world is meeting in Glasgow or was meeting in Glasgow over the past week at the COP26 summit that is focused on getting countries to act towards the glaring issue of climate change. And year after year, say almost decade after decade, countries have been coming together to discuss, debate, deliberate, and then to demonstrate actions that they're taking towards helping the world respond to the changing climate that's caused by human actions, behaviors, and consumptions of fossil fuels and other natural resources. And so this would be an example of cooperation, because as countries are coming together to say, how are we going to cooperate to help address the causes and effects of global warming and of global climate change? Well, here's something we can do, right? We can protect vast swaths of land within either our land territory or within our international waters, or in our water boundary territory. And so I really just found this fascinating, one, because I've always been interested in the Galapagos Islands. One day, hopefully, get to visit. But secondly, the sweeping nature of the action. And obviously, this is one country trying to cooperate with others. Haven't heard of any other country who was attending COP26 saying that they're also going to conserve massive amounts of marine life and waters off their borders, but maybe take a closer look. Now, last thing I like to bring up are the implications of this. So you heard a paragraph in there about how these efforts could be viewed, or Ecuador's efforts could be viewed as trying to counter the Chinese government or Chinese fishing interest in the region. So I just want to go ahead and play a little bit of this article in the Wall Street Journal that talks about this and kind of frames it slightly different. So I'll go ahead and listen to this part of the article.
Bogota.
And I'll go ahead and change the voice just to kind of give it a different sound to it.
Bogota, Colombia, conservationists see the expansion of a marine reserve across a wide area of the Pacific from Ecuador to Central America as an important step toward thwarting giant Chinese fishing fleets that are accused of plundering fishing stocks. But enforcement is likely to be a challenge. Under a plan announced Tuesday, the governments of Ecuador, Colombia, Panama, and Costa Rica said the famed Galapagos Islands would be united via a marine corridor with Colombia's Malpelo Island and the Cocos and Coiba Islands off Central America. The goal is to mark off a stretch of ocean twice the size of Arizona as off-limits to industrial fishing. The greatest thing about this is that it is the first multi-country protected area in the world. It is a great step, said Maximiliano Bello, an international ocean policy expert for California-based Mission Blue, who advised the Latin American governments. We have technologies now that can help us protect the area and satellites that give us incredible information. The challenge, he said, will be protecting an expanse of ocean where there is little environmental oversight. How do we make sure that the high seas is not a wasteland, that is not the Wild West where there are no rules? Mr. Bello said. Though the Latin American governments didn't single out China in announcing the new marine reserve, they have in the past complained about Chinese fishing fleets operating from Argentina north through Mexico. Environmentalists say hundreds of Chinese fishing ships plunder the waters off Latin America searching for giant squid, threatening the sustainability of a key source of the food chain for other maritime animals, including humpback whales, rays, giant turtles, and hammerhead sharks. Milko Schwarzman, Argentine conservationist and expert in Chinese fishing activities in South America, called the problem an ecological time bomb. It creates damage to the entire food chain. Mr. Schwarzman said he has counted some 800 Chinese fishing ships in the waters of South America this year, up from less than 52 decades ago when the boats first appeared. The US says illegal fishing also affects local economies and jobs in developing nations, as the activity has overtaken piracy as the top global maritime security threat. China is the biggest bad actor in this space, Ray Mabus, former Secretary of the US Navy, said in a September event on illegal fishing hosted by Oceana, a leading organization that works to protect the oceans. Their actions decimate waters, threaten sovereignty, economies, and livelihoods. The Chinese government didn't respond to a request for comment. In the past, China's foreign ministry said it has zero tolerance for illegal fishing and called on Chinese fishermen to comply with the maritime laws and regulations of countries like Ecuador.
So the article goes on just to describe a bit more that interaction and the importance of preserving or conserving that part of the world. But just note the difference, right? The first article saying, like, look at this action by the Equatorial government, the benefits of it to the marine life. And then the second article is focused kind of on the economics, the politics of it. And so one of the implications of any country government and in this case, multiple country governments taking unified action, it can always be perceived as, okay, why are they taking this action using the kind of realist framework? So if this is in their multinational interest, then whose interest is it against? And so obviously there's a connection being made with overfishing in the region, its implications for the ecological and the food web system. And so whoever is engaging or interfering with that, in this case, not so much maybe the Chinese government, but Chinese flagged ships or bait ships, fishing ships, can have these kind of implications. And so it sounds like this isn't creating any real tension between governments per se, but it might be creating tension between business interests in particular in these particular countries, and particularly fishing interest. So this is one of the implications of cooperating, is that even if you're like, hey, let's work together and get things done, some people might see it as conflictual. So with that, I'll go ahead and shift us over to discussion. So we'll stop the recording. Thanks for taking the time to listen in, and have a great day, night, morning, whatever you're listening to this. Bye.